This is Teen Quest Live, where we create online conversations about youth culture, parenting, and issues facing youth workers in today's world. Our host, Mark Witt, has served as a pastor and youth pastor in multiple churches, and he's the founder and director of Teen Quest, a youth ministry that creates peak experiences for youth groups and teenagers through camping, events, missions, and evangelism. Welcome to Teen Quest Live.
Hi. When a child is young, he spends time with his parents and loves to be around them. When he becomes a teenager, this all changes and he wants to be with his friends. The problem is, being with his friends is more important than just about anything he does. If he picks bad friends, his value system becomes their value system. For that teenager to go against his peers when they choose to do wrong is a very difficult thing for him. Today we're going to talk about peer pressure, pushing kids to do things they would never do. My guest today is Neil Suiters, youth pastor of Open Door Church in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Neil's on the front line of working with teenagers day by day, and he's here to share his thoughts. Neil, good to have you on the show. When you were a teenager, did you follow the wrong kind of crowd?
Well, thank you, Mark. It's good to be here. Actually, yeah, I did to an extent. I was the youngest of 4 kids, and my parents were divorced when I was 5. So I was longing for acceptance. And there were times I was a leader, times when I was a follower. And, yeah, there were some times when I got in with the wrong crowd and did things I'm not proud I've done.
And what? And why did you get started then that way? I mean, you, I'm sure, you had some good training. What caused you to want to be around the wrong kind of crowd?
Well, you're right. I grew up in church. My parents were charter members. I knew right from wrong, but I wanted to have a sense of belonging. I wanted to feel like I was accepted. And you mentioned before, when a kid is the first 12 years of life, they draw their self-esteem or their self-worth from parents and from family. Right. But when they get to be 12, they start to look for acceptance from their peers. Right. I wanted to feel like I had something to offer. I wanted to feel like I was one of the group. So neighborhood guys, we got together and did things together, football and just playing stuff, which eventually turned into a little more raucous activities. Because we wanted to find who we were. We wanted to stake our claim, so to speak.
Now here you are as a youth pastor. Obviously, you've overcome those negative peer pressures, and you're now serving the Lord full time, and you've overcome the peer pressure. What did you do to make that change?
Well, the biggest thing I think I did was continue to find my identity in Christ and find out that because Jesus Christ loved me unconditionally and still loves me, that was my acceptance. And if God is for us, who can be against us? It became a matter of internalizing that truth and actually letting it apply to my life.
Come on, Neil. There are a lot of good kids out there that get involved in groups, and they end up being the wrong kind of groups, and they go in innocently, and before long they're doing stuff that they know is against their value system, and they're caught up in it.
Okay, you're right. I was probably hasty when I said a lot of the kids are doing it to make a statement against their parents. There are cases where, the kids have a split choice to make, and more often than not, they use the pressure to give in to something that they know deep down inside if they had time to think it through, they wouldn't have done it. But yeah, there are times where kids just get caught up in that, and it starts early. When the kid's told not to get a cookie off the cookie tray, and they do. They know they shouldn't, but they do. It just, when the pressure is mounting greater in the adolescent years, then they tend to do that a little more frequently, and they can find themselves in problems like that.
Someone said that teenagers like to rebel one way or the other as well. I mean, sometimes, like in my situation, I kind of rebelled the other way. I got involved. My parents were going to a kind of a quasi-evangelical church. I got involved in a real strong evangelical church, and that was kind of my rebellion growing up.
Wow.
In a sense. But I understand there is rebellion with kids. Do you think sometimes kids learn peer pressure from adults and parents. I mean, when the adults get together, they do things that are against their value system sometimes that they teach their kids, and kids see that stuff and they go, wait a minute, and then they go, okay, well, if mom and dad or the adults I hang around do this stuff, why not?
That's a great point. We cannot delude ourselves into thinking that peer pressure only applies to adolescents, because you're right, parents do that. Adults want to fit in. Adults want to be accepted, and yeah, they sometimes model what it looks like to give in to peer pressure. So you're right. It's a great point.
Let's talk about the problem. Neil, I think there's several problems that lead to peer pressure. And obviously, the average kid gets involved with crowds or peers, but sometimes it's good peers. Sometimes if we can teach our kids to hang around good peers, that's a good thing. But a lot of times, obviously, they hang around the wrong kind of kids. But I believe, for instance, kids from broken homes or single families have a tendency to look for peers because the family unit is not strong. It's not there anymore. And sometimes kids are looking for love in all the wrong places. What say you?
I think you're exactly right. As I mentioned in my own particular childhood growing up, when my parents got divorced, I felt I was responsible. I felt if I had been a better kid, my parents would have stayed together. Now, that wasn't the truth, the case. That was just my perception. But
right.
Yeah, I wanted to fit in. I wanted to feel accepted and feel unconditionally, I can't say loved, but accepted. And I would do whatever it took to be accepted. And I, that was back in the late 60s, early 70s, when divorce wasn't as rampant as it is today. Our youth pastors today are dealing with probably 50 to 60% of the youth group coming from broken homes or split homes. And there is a greater need there, a need for acceptance unconditionally. And I think kids are looking for that, and the pressure is greater, I think, once they go into middle school and are given more choices to make.
There's another thing I think lends to the cause of this problem of peer pressure, and I believe it's a lack of values education. In other words, I'm not convinced that parents are teaching kids values, and I don't know how many youth pastors are really sitting down with kids and teaching them values. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, Mark, one of my biggest challenges, I think, is I have to negate the impact and influence of a postmodern society. Because a postmodern society and postmodernism is telling our kids there are no absolutes. I believe you're right. The moral virtues are not being taught or being reinforced. I read somewhere just recently that I think 80% of the millennial generation feels that same-sex marriages are acceptable. And that's, to me, is 2 or 3 decades away from that. I never would have thought 20, 30 years ago that would be the case. So we're going against an education system and a value system that is self-gratifying, do your own thing, who are you to judge, there's no right or no wrong, there's no absolute truth, and there's a big vacuum now, a big void that parents and indeed youth ministries need to hammer home moral values.
Now, another cause, I believe, Neil, is parents are too strict or they're too lenient. Probably the latter of the case. Leniency is probably the big deal, but some parents are just so strict that the kids can't even do anything. On the other hand, some parents are just lenient. Do whatever you want. Do you think that causes peer pressure?
Well, that is a trend now because the parents are being taught not to discipline because it's going to damage the child's self-esteem or self-worth. But I firmly believe, even as adolescents, that there needs to be structure, there needs to be guidelines and authority enforcement and authority influence. And if it's not coming from the home, then quite frankly, it will come from peer pressures. I agree with you. I think you're right.
And then one other thing I have, maybe you have some more things to share, but I believe that when parents allow their daughter or their son to start dating early. Early dating. I believe from my studies that this causes sexual activity in dating later on. And what a tragedy.
Well, I think you're right. You know, it's been said that, I'll make sure I get it right now, that girls will use sex to get love and boys will use love to get sex. You know, and there is that void where the kids are wanting to explore. And, you know, the old adage I've always told my kids, my youth group, is if I don't want you to have a banana split, I'm not going to start feeding you ice cream. By that, I mean, if I don't want you to be sexually promiscuous and sexually active, I'm not going to encourage dating. I have my kids try to focus on going out as groups and not just a boy and a girl, because boys and girls oftentimes can't handle the aloneness factor or the lack of activity, boredom. Okay, it's kind of awkward now. What do we do? Let's make out. You know, and so we try to avoid that. But pressure will come in a great way, particularly girls in some high school circles today. You know, to be a virgin is almost a disgrace to some girls, and they want to give themselves away just to fit in, and then boys use sexual activity as a conquest, and that, I think, all goes back to peer pressure, where the peers are rather directly or indirectly trying to influence behavior. You know, I think. Go ahead.
Are your kids aware in your youth group that peer pressure can be a problem? Are they aware that hanging around the wrong kinds of friends, or maybe finding themselves being around the wrong kind of friends and not even realizing, do they know that's a problem?
I believe so, because I've told them numerous times, everyone you associate with either builds you up or tears you down. You know, the late Joe Paterno, Penn State, used to say, every day you either get better or you get worse. You never stay the same. And, you know, Chuck Swindoll has the illustration of a white glove and going out after a rainfall and scooping up a handful of mud. Well, you didn't make that mud glovey. The mud made the glove muddy. And it's the same thing, you know, whenever virtuous, moral Christians hang out with friends who are not of the same persuasion and same values, it's going to pull them down. And they don't realize at times, so I'm constantly encouraging them to be aware of who they're hanging out with. And whether it's a public school, Christian school, homeschool, everyone's seeking to be accepted. And I'm trying to, you know, as you mentioned, you know, you yourself use peer pressure to rebel in the right way and go to a more evangelical church. I want to use the powers of peer pressure for a positive effect. I want to have the kids have their quiet time and study the Word of God and spend time in prayer and learn to share their faith, because the friends they're hanging out with are pressuring them to do as well. And by example, they want to follow suit. So we can use peer pressure, I think, for a good cause as well.
Now, do you have parents come to you say, my child is involved in these groups or their friends, and they're going downhill, we're having problems with them because of the fact that, I mean, are parents aware this is a problem in your youth group?
Mark, I'm going to probably be conservative here and say less than 10% are aware of what's going on. Our church ministry has a Christian school, and of our youth group, probably half of them are in the Christian school, and many parents think, oh, good, my kid's in a Christian school, therefore, you know,
no problems.
Well. You know,
all my problems are solved, right?
Right. You know, and my response is, you can't take the kid out of the jungle. You have to take the jungle out of the kid.
Right.
And no matter what environment they're in, there's going to be pressure and temptation. So they're all aware of it.
Let's talk about solving this problem. I mean, I don't know if we can solve it here in 20 minutes here, but I personally believe that parents are the key and the greatest influence with their children. Obviously, I mean, they're going to know their children the rest of their lives, and their children are going to know them, and so forth. There's that relationship there that's never going to go away, But I believe parents can be the key to solving the problem. Now, I believe that, like you and many youth pastors can obviously work with kids, but I think it has to be a cooperative effort with parents and kids to solve the problem.
I couldn't agree with you more.
My little granddaughter is 9 years old, and she wants to serve the Lord right now. But I know, Neil, in a few years she's going to be caught up in wanting to please her peers. She's going to be caught up in hanging around, maybe, hopefully not, the wrong kids, the wrong kinds of kids. How can we help her parents? Help her not to get involved with that kind of group?
Well, I think her parents and all of our parents need to be in tune to what their kids are doing. Ask questions, know who the friends are, have them over to your house. We have a son, my wife and I have a son who is 26 and daughter who just turned 17. And while they were growing up, we wanted to know what they were doing, who they're doing it with, and what the homes are like, and just not have our head buried in the sand thinking, well, because our kids are children of the ministry, then they're going to be fine. It's incumbent upon the parents to know what's going on, what their kids are doing, who they're spending time with. I think, like you said before, legalism could be counterproductive. But we can't have the NSA approach to find out what they're doing and who they're talking to all the time, but we can ask questions. Well, and we can open our homes to their friends and let them come over and spend time under our leadership and our influence.
Ronald Reagan said, "Trust but verify." Maybe that's what we should do. What do we do? What do we do to help our parents? I mean, you're working with a group of young people. We talked about parents. I believe, and I think you agree with me, they're the key.
Yes.
What can we do, Neil, to help parents or help our youth group, help the kids in our youth group overcome peer pressure? What can we tell them? What can we say? What can we do to change this thing? I mean, it's destroying our kids. I mean, they're out there falling into habits that they shouldn't be falling into at a young age that can affect them the rest of their lives because of peers. What can we do?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to identify our roles in the kids' lives. We are not to take the parents' place. We can't have the parents expect that, well, we'll put Johnny into the youth group and let the youth pastor help him. We need to let the parents know that we are there to complement their job as raising the parents. We're to help supplement their efforts and their energies. So I think if we can identify and clarify the roles that we should have with the parents, that's step number one. Step number two, I think, would be to educate them. Have parent workshops, have Bible studies on parenting teens, have ways to educate the parents on what peer pressure is, what to look for, spotting the red flags, the danger signals that are there, catching the alarms when they're going off, and let the parents know what they're fighting against. They can learn early when there's playtime with their 3-year-old kids, and little Billy begins to hit because when he spends playtime with Tommy, Tommy hits. Okay? So parents, guess what? This is peer pressure, and this is a learned behavior by those around you. So we can identify them even as early as when they're toddlers of what peer pressure is and how to recognize the signs and the dangers of it. I think those two things would probably be monumental in the task. Right. Clarify your role and then educate them.
I really believe in teaching young people to learn how to stand alone when they find themselves in situations where they know that's wrong, to know how to stand alone, know what's right, and know the fact that when temptation comes, how do we deal with it? When things come that are against our value systems, what do we do at that point? I think it's so important to help parents learn to teach their kids also to stand alone. That's very important. Now let's wrap this up this morning or today with with this solving this problem. Let me build a scenario. Let's suppose Johnny's parents come to you with Johnny and say, he's 14 years old and he was caught drinking, with some friends last night, and they got caught, and you're sitting down with them, with Johnny and the parents, and you're trying to help the parents deal with the situation. The parents were shocked. They didn't even realize that Johnny was hanging around those kids, and they were really shocked to know that Johnny was drinking. So you're sitting down with them. What do you say to a parent? What do you say to this family? How do you help them?
Well, the first thing I'd probably do would be identify whether or not it was Christian beer.
Okay.
I'm just kidding about that. I have pet peeves about Christians compromising. So, no, I would probably that's a great question, by the way. I would sit down with the parents and in Johnny's presence and let them remind them the fact that they're not above sin either. And we've all made choices that were wrong. We've all sinned and made wrong choices. I would encourage them to find out who Johnny's friends were and try to forbid him from seeing them. And I say try to forbid because some kids, when you tell them they can't hang out with those kids, they're going to be drawn right to those kids.
They're going to do it anyway.
So I would try to encourage them to not identify and associate with those kids anymore, because it's kind of hard for leopard to change its spots, and it's kind of hard for them to do anything other than what they're used to doing. I would talk to Johnny with his parents there and find out why. Was this something he wanted to do, or was he caught in a situation where he felt he couldn't say no to their offer of the beer, and just help him to make better choices. I would definitely establish guidelines and accountability, and they would need to know what Johnny's doing and where he's doing. Johnny violated their trust, and trust, once it's broken, cannot be restored automatically. There has to be some time. I would give Johnny severe consequences and have guidelines for him to be accountable.
One thing that I always remember doing when we had our children at home, that my wife and I always prayed that our kids would get caught. We always said, Lord, help them to get caught when they do wrong. And boy, I tell you, over the years, God answered that prayer. And we've many times, our son, at least one of our sons, has gotten caught when they did wrong, and that was a wake-up call to help us to help him to restore himself back to where he needs to be. Now, one last question. Let's go to the youth group. We're sitting down. You're sitting down as a youth pastor, and today we're going to talk about peer pressure. Today we're going to talk about how to overcome peer pressure. You're talking to, say, middle school kids that are really not involved in a lot of peer pressure. What would you say to them? What kind of a thing would you tell your students in that circle, in that room, about that very topic? What would you say to them?
Well, I'll be open with them and extremely vulnerable, and give them examples from my life when I was in middle school of temptation that was a result of peer pressure, and how I sometimes took a stand and sometimes I gave in. And I think if they understand ways peer pressure can influence them and what forms peer pressure might take. See, some kids don't realize that they're being pressured by their peers, because, as I mentioned, peer pressure can be covert and subtle, or sometimes it can be overt and just in your face. They might be in situations where they don't realize that they are actually being under the influence of peer pressure. I would communicate to them what it looks like. Be open with them, be vulnerable with them, and tell them, in my situation, what I had faced. And I tell my youth leaders all the time, it's amazing. I'm 50 years old. Whenever I was 14 years old, I faced not near the pressure and temptation 14-year-olds face today. It's mind-boggling how times have changed. But the kids need to be aware of what type of pressure, peer pressure, they're facing and what it looks like. They have to hear from me what I had done in my life and not glorify the sin, but tell them how I felt. And then they need to also, I think, have a strategy. Many times ministers and parents tend to be reactive more so than proactive. Why do we wait until we find out Johnny was out drinking?
Right.
Before, because we assume that he's fine. We need to be more proactive. We need to ask questions. We need to offer support and pray for our kids, pray with our kids, and just let the Spirit of God build them. We can't just take for granted that they're under a hedge of protection, because we need to pray the safety over them. So to answer your question, I would talk to junior high, middle school kids and tell them how real peer pressure is, what it looks like, and be vulnerable with them and say, hey, whenever I was your age, here's what I was tempted to do, and here's how I gave in. Now, praise God, I haven't gone back there since, but it is real.
Well, Neil, sure good talking with you today. I'm talking to Neil Suiters, the youth pastor of the Open Door Church in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Got a lot of good stuff to share. Thank you so much for your being with us today on this program, Peer Pressure. I pray that our little talk today will help somebody out there that is dealing with this very problem. Thank you, Neil.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hey, thanks for joining us today on Teen Quest Live with Mark Witt. You know, the discussion is just starting. You can visit our website and leave your comments and thoughts about this topic. Find us online at teenquest.org. That's teenquest.org. And we'll see you next time on Teen Quest Live.